Did you know Indiana Jones once fought a real vampire? Harrison Ford wore a beard stolen from The Fugitive. And the show was George Lucas's secret testing ground for Star Wars. From meeting a future Vietnamese revolutionary to featuring Daniel Craig before he was Bond, this ambitious TV series was stranger and more groundbreaking than anyone remembers. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, 1992-1996. Fact 1. River Phoenix turned it down. When George Lucas started developing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles in the early 1990s, he had the perfect actor in mind for the lead role. River Phoenix had already played teenage Indiana Jones in the memorable opening sequence of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where he showed how Indy got his iconic fedora and developed his fear of snakes. Harrison Ford himself had suggested Phoenix for that role because he thought the young actor resembled him more than anyone else, and their chemistry was so natural that Phoenix had even played Ford's son in the 1986 film The Mosquito Coast. So when Lucas began assembling his television series, offering the starring role to Phoenix seemed like a no-brainer. The problem was that Phoenix had spent years working hard to break away from television and establish himself as a serious film actor, and he had absolutely no interest in going backwards. He turned down the role without much hesitation, making it clear that returning to the small screen wasn't part of his career plan. Lucas also approached Harrison Ford to reprise his role as the older Indiana Jones for bookend segments throughout the series, but Ford declined as well, feeling that television didn't have anything to offer his career at that point in time. With both actors passing on the opportunity, Lucas had to find new talent to bring young Indy to life. He eventually cast Corey Carrier as the 10-year-old version of the character and Sean Patrick Flanery as the teenage and young adult Indy, both of whom would go on to define the role for television audiences throughout the show's run. Fact 2. Harrison Ford's bearded cameo. Even though Harrison Ford initially turned down George Lucas's offer to appear regularly in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, he eventually agreed to make one special appearance as a favor to Lucas, who had been instrumental in launching Ford's career through American Graffiti, Star Wars, and of course, the Indiana Jones films. The episode that aired in March of 1993 was called Young Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues, and it featured Ford as a 50-year-old Indiana Jones in the bookend segments that introduced and concluded the main story. What makes this appearance particularly memorable is that Ford sports a full beard throughout his scenes, which is the only time in the entire Indiana Jones franchise that the character has ever had facial hair. The reason for this unusual look had nothing to do with the story and everything to do with Ford's schedule. He was simultaneously filming The Fugitive, the hit thriller where he played Dr. Richard Kimball, a character who wore a beard for much of the film. Ford shot his young Indy scenes in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in December of 1992 during a break from filming The Fugitive, and his contract for that movie prevented him from shaving off the beard. Rather than cause problems with his feature film commitment, the Young Indy production team simply worked the beard into the story, with Ford playing an older, more weathered version of the character hiding out in a snowy Wyoming cabin. The gambit worked from a publicity standpoint, as the episode saw a ratings boost of more than 10 million viewers compared to the previous week, though the success was short-lived and couldn't save the struggling series from cancellation later that year. Fact 3. The longest location shoot ever. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles wasn't just ambitious in its storytelling scope, it was also one of the most logistically challenging television productions ever attempted. George Lucas wanted the series to have the visual quality and authenticity of a feature film, which meant actually traveling to real locations around the world rather than relying on studio sets and backlots. The numbers behind this commitment are staggering. Over the course of the production, the cast and crew filmed in 23 different countries across multiple continents, from the deserts of North Africa to the streets of Prague, from the jungles of Africa to the capitals of Europe. In total, the production traveled more than 165,000 miles, which is roughly equivalent to circling the entire globe 6 times. Even more remarkable, the crew shot continuously for 152 weeks, which at the time made it the longest location shoot in television history. Producer Rick McCallum later described the experience as relentless, with the team working 6 days a week and spending the first year shooting for 52 weeks straight without a break. In just 16 weeks during the first year, they managed to film in 17 different countries, which required an incredibly efficient and tightly coordinated production schedule. The crew stayed away from home for extended periods, forming close bonds as they dealt with the challenges of constantly moving from one location to another. This approach to filmmaking was practically unheard of for a television series at the time, where most shows were confined to sound stages or local shooting locations. But Lucas believed it was essential to making Young Indy feel like a genuine cinematic experience rather than just another TV show. Fact 4. Sean Patrick Flanery wore a prosthetic scar. One of the most dedicated but nearly invisible continuity details in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles involved Sean Patrick Flanery's commitment to matching Harrison. Ford's distinctive appearance as the adult Indiana Jones. Ford has a small but noticeable scar on his chin that he got in a real-life car accident years before playing the character, and it became part of Indy's iconic look throughout the film series. When Flanery was cast to play the teenage and young adult version of Indiana Jones, the production team decided they needed to include this detail to maintain visual continuity between the younger and older versions of the character. The solution was to create a prosthetic scar that matched Ford's actual facial scar and apply it to Flanery's chin for every single scene he appeared in throughout the entire series. The attention to this detail was meticulous, with makeup artists carefully positioning and blending the prosthetic to make it look natural on camera. However, because the scar is relatively small and subtle, and because television resolution in the early 1990s wasn't as sharp as modern high-definition broadcasts, most viewers watching the show never noticed it was there. Even fans who watched the series multiple times often missed this tiny but important detail that connected Flanery's portrayal to Ford's iconic performance. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes commitment to authenticity that defined the entire production, where George Lucas and his team went to extraordinary lengths to make sure every aspect of the show felt like a genuine part of the Indiana Jones universe, even if those efforts weren't always immediately visible to the audience watching at home on their television screens. Fact 5. Future James Bond fought Indy before Daniel Craig became one of the most iconic actors to portray James Bond. He was a relatively unknown British actor picking up small roles wherever he could find them, and one of those early appearances happened to be in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Craig appeared in the episode titled Daredevils of the Desert, which was actually a 2-part adventure that took place in Palestine during World War I and featured spectacular cavalry charge sequences inspired by the classic film Lawrence of Arabia. In the episode, Craig played a character named Schiller, a German colonel working as a counterintelligence agent trying to thwart Indiana Jones's secret mission to protect the water supply at Beersheba. Craig brought his signature intense glare and physical presence to the role, even though he was playing a villain who ultimately didn't survive the episode. The climax of his appearance featured a brutal hand-to-hand fight with Sean Patrick Flanery's Young Indy, showcasing the kind of physical action work that would later become a hallmark of Craig's Bond films. After a tense confrontation, Indy shoots Schiller dead, ending Craig's brief but memorable appearance in the series. What makes this casting even more interesting is that years later, Craig would work with both Harrison Ford and Steven Spielberg in the 2011 Western science fiction film Cowboys and Aliens, creating an unexpected full-circle moment where the actor who once fought young Indy on television ended up starring alongside the original Indiana Jones himself. At the time of filming Young Indy, nobody could have predicted that this relatively minor guest role would be filled by someone who would go on to redefine one of cinema's most beloved characters. Fact 6. The show featured future stars before fame. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles had an uncanny ability to cast actors who were either on the verge of major stardom or would become household names years after their appearances on the show. Catherine Zeta-Jones appeared in the same Daredevils of the Desert episode as Daniel Craig, playing an Arab double agent and belly dancer named Maya, who became a fan-favorite character despite only appearing in one episode. This was before she relocated to Los Angeles and found major success in films like The Mask of Zorro, Entrapment, and her Academy Award-winning performance in Chicago. Christopher Lee, already a legend for his work in horror films and as a Hammer Dracula, appeared as Count Ottokar Graf Charon, a real-life Austrian-Hungarian diplomat, bringing his commanding screen presence to what turned out to be a relatively brief role. Elizabeth Hurley showed up before becoming an international star, as did Jeffrey Wright, who would later appear in multiple James Bond films as Felix Leiter and star in productions like the Hunger Games sequels and the recent Batman film. Perhaps most intriguing for Star Wars fans, Ian McDiarmid, who played Emperor Palpatine across multiple Star Wars films, appeared in an episode playing a completely different character in George Lucas's other major franchise. The series also featured early appearances from actors like Max von Sydow, the legendary Swedish actor with a 70-year career, and Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO in Star Wars and appeared in a Young Indie TV movie as a quirky French gadget expert reminiscent of James Bond's Q. The show's casting directors had an impressive eye for talent, managing to bring in performers who would go on to define major franchises and win prestigious awards, all while they were still relatively unknown or early in their careers. Fact 7. Young Indy met a future communist leader. One of the most politically fascinating and unexpected historical encounters in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles occurred in the episode Paris, May 1919, which was later re-edited into a feature-length installment called Winds of Change. In this episode, Indiana Jones is working as a translator at the Paris Peace Conference following World War I, helping to negotiate the terms of what would become the Treaty of Versailles. While there, he befriends a Vietnamese waiter working at one of the Parisian cafes, a young man going by the name Nguyen Ai Quoc. The two strike up conversations about politics, civil liberties, and the unfair treatment of colonial peoples under French rule. This seemingly minor character interaction takes on enormous historical significance when you realize that Nguyen Ai Quoc would later become known by a different name, Ho Chi Minh, the revolutionary leader who would go on to lead North Vietnam and become one of the most influential communist figures of the 20th century. In the episode, Ho Chi Minh is portrayed as an idealistic young man trying to petition the Western powers for better civil liberties and representation for the Vietnamese people, hoping that the architects of the post-war world order would listen to the concerns of colonized nations. The character was played by actor Alec Mapa, who brought a quiet dignity to the role. George Lucas even produced a companion documentary about Ho Chi Minh titled Ho Chi Minh: The Price of Freedom, which explored the leader's complex legacy and the decades-long struggle for Vietnamese independence that would eventually draw the United States into one of its most controversial and costly wars. It's a perfect example of how the series used Indiana Jones as a witness to pivotal moments in history. Fact 8. The only supernatural episode was a vampire story. Throughout most of its run, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles took a deliberately grounded and realistic approach to history, avoiding the supernatural elements that were such a big part of the Indiana Jones films like the Ark of the Covenant or the Temple of Doom. That's what makes the episode Transylvania, January 1918, so unusual and memorable. In this installment, Indiana Jones and a small team of Allied intelligence agents are sent on a mission to investigate why a rogue Romanian general named Matthias Targo has been raiding German prisoner of war camps and taking Allied soldiers captive. When they arrive at Targo's remote castle in Transylvania, they quickly discover something far more sinister than a simple military operation. General Targo isn't just a separatist warlord. He's an actual vampire who believes himself to be the reincarnation of Vlad the Impaler, the historical figure who inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. The episode doesn't hold back on the horror elements either, featuring graphic imagery, including impaled corpses, severed limbs, blood pouring from walls, demonic possession, and spontaneous human combustion. One particularly disturbing scene has a character being brutally tortured and mutilated behind a curtain, while the others listen helplessly to his screams. The production team committed fully to the vampire mythology, showing Targo surviving a knife to the back and falling from great heights, and making it clear that the only way to kill him is by driving a stake through his heart at a crossroads, after which his body bursts into flames. The episode was considered so violent that it wasn't aired in its original form in the United States and was deemed too intense for television in several countries. It remains the single strangest and most supernatural installment in the entire series. Fact 9. Franz Kafka helped Indy with bureaucracy. One of the most cleverly conceived and unexpectedly humorous episodes of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles takes place in Prague in August of 1917, and it transforms a simple mission into an absurdist nightmare that would be right at home in a work of existential literature. Indiana Jones is stationed in the Czech city as an intelligence operative, and he's been told that he needs to receive an extremely important and time-sensitive phone call in his hotel room from a crucial informant. There's just one problem. His room doesn't have a telephone, and he needs to get one installed before the call comes through. What follows is a Kafkaesque journey through the maze of Austro-Hungarian bureaucracy, where Indy encounters endless red tape, arbitrary policies, forms that require other forms, offices that send him to other offices, and officials who seem to take sadistic pleasure in obstructing his simple request. He's arrested for bureaucratic violations he doesn't understand, put on trial for infractions he didn't commit, and thrown in jail before finally managing to get released by signing a form admitting that his arrest was itself a bureaucratic error. The episode's masterstroke comes when Indy visits the telephone office and encounters one of the clerks working there. A creepy, unsettling man named Franz Kafka, played with eerie perfection by actor Tim McInerney. Yes, that Franz Kafka, the legendary writer whose novels The Trial and the Castle are defining works of absurdist fiction about individuals crushed by incomprehensible bureaucratic systems. The episode is essentially a comedic dramatization of themes from Kafka's own writing, with Indy experiencing firsthand the nightmare scenarios that would later appear in the author's most famous works, making this one of the most literarily sophisticated and self-aware episodes in the entire series. Fact 10. It was Lucas's Star Wars prequel testing ground. While the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was ostensibly created as an educational adventure series for young audiences, George Lucas had a secret agenda that wouldn't become fully apparent until years later. The show was actually serving as an elaborate testing ground where Lucas and his team could experiment with revolutionary digital filmmaking technologies that would later become essential to creating the Star Wars prequel trilogy. At the time, using extensive computer-generated imagery for backgrounds, set extensions, and digital manipulation of footage was relatively new and expensive, making it risky to attempt on a big-budget feature film without knowing if the technology would actually work. Lucas saw Young Indy as the perfect opportunity to push these boundaries in a more forgiving medium, since television's lower resolution would hide imperfections that might be glaringly obvious on a cinema screen. Producer Rick McCallum, who worked on Young Indy before producing all 3 Star Wars prequels, later explained that the series was deliberately structured to teach the crew how to make films in a completely new way. They used digital effects to extend physical sets, replace backgrounds, add crowds of digital extras, change clear skies to dramatic sunsets, and generally manipulate footage in ways that would have been impossible or prohibitively expensive using traditional methods. Lucas told American Cinematographer magazine that Young Indy was a perfect test case because they could move things around much more quickly and cheaply, allowing them to experiment with digital technology more freely than they ever could on a theatrical film. The series also pioneered the use of nonlinear digital editing systems, with Young Indy being one of the first television shows to use what would eventually become Avid, the industry-standard editing software. Many of the key crew members from Young Indy, including cinematographer David Tattersall and production designer Gavin Bouquet, went on to work on The Phantom Menace and the other prequels, bringing all the lessons they learned from the television series to the big screen. Fact 11. George Lucas created 94 educational documentaries. George Lucas's commitment to making the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles an educational experience didn't end when the series was canceled in 1993. When he began preparing the show for DVD release more than a decade later, Lucas decided to create an unprecedented companion feature that would transform the series into a comprehensive educational tool. Working with producer Rick McCallum and a dedicated team of documentary filmmakers, Lucas oversaw the creation of 94 separate half-hour historical documentaries that explored every major historical figure, event, and location featured throughout the Young Indy series. These weren't simple behind-the-scenes features or brief historical footnotes, but fully produced documentary films covering topics as diverse as the life of T.E. Lawrence, the strategies of World War I, the artistic innovations of Pablo Picasso, the philosophical theories of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, the birth of the Jazz Age, the complexities of colonial rule in Africa, and dozens of other subjects spanning art, history, science, literature, politics, and philosophy. Each documentary was designed to give viewers a deeper understanding of the real historical context behind the fictional adventures they just watched, effectively turning each Young Indy episode into a jumping-off point for serious historical study. The massive undertaking delayed the DVD release for years, with Rick McCallum confirming in 2002 that the documentaries were in development but wouldn't be finished for 3 or 4 more years. The complete set was finally released between 2007 and 2008, timed to coincide with the theatrical release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it represented one of the most ambitious educational initiatives ever attached to an entertainment franchise. Lucas has since made many of these documentaries available for free on YouTube, specifically for teachers and students to use in classrooms. Fact 12. The series cost more than most movies. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles operated on a budget that was absolutely unprecedented for television in the early 1990s and would be considered extravagant even by today's standards for prestige TV. Each individual episode cost between $1.5 and $1.7 million to produce, with the total budget for the series reaching approximately $27 million by the time production wrapped. To put that in perspective, most television dramas of that era were working with budgets of a few $100,000 per episode, making Young Indies per episode cost roughly 3 to 4 times higher than the industry standard. The money was necessary to achieve George Lucas's vision of creating a television series that looked and felt like a theatrical film, with authentic period costumes, elaborate sets that recreated early 20th century locations, massive crowd scenes with thousands of extras, and the kind of action sequences that audiences expected from the Indiana Jones franchise. The production employed over 1,500 speaking parts across the series and used more than 50,000 extras in various episodes, all of whom needed to be costumed, fed, and coordinated. The crew served over 120,000 meals during the course of filming, which gives you some idea of the sheer scale of the operation. Despite these enormous expenses, the show never managed to attract the viewership numbers that would justify such a massive investment, which is ultimately why ABC canceled it after just 2 seasons. The high production costs combined with low ratings created an unsustainable situation where the show was losing money with every episode that aired, making it one of the most expensive commercial failures in television history, even though it won multiple Emmy Awards and earned critical praise for its ambition and quality. Fact 13. Over 50,000 extras and 120,000 meals. The sheer logistical scale of producing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is almost difficult to comprehend when you break down the actual numbers involved in the day-to-day operations. Over the course of the series' production, which spanned multiple years and visited 23 countries across 6 continents, the show employed more than 1,500 actors in speaking roles, giving the series a depth and variety of characters that was unusual for television at the time. But the speaking roles were just the beginning of the casting challenge. The production needed to create convincing historical environments for early 20th century settings, ranging from World War I battlefields to elegant Parisian cafes to African villages to Middle Eastern deserts. And all of these locations required appropriate crowds of period-appropriate people to make them feel authentic. In total, the series used more than 50,000 extras across all of its episodes, each of whom needed to be outfitted in historically accurate costumes and directed to behave appropriately for their time and place. Managing this enormous cast and crew required an equally enormous support operation, particularly when it came to feeding everyone. The production served over 120,000 meals to cast and crew members during filming, which meant coordinating food service in remote locations across multiple continents, dealing with different dietary requirements and preferences, and maintaining health and safety standards in countries with vastly different food safety regulations. Producer Rick McCallum and his team had to essentially run a traveling city that moved from country to country every few weeks, setting up temporary production bases, hiring local support staff, coordinating with government officials for filming permits, and solving countless logistical problems that most television productions never have to face. The fact that they managed to pull it off at all is remarkable. The fact that they did it while maintaining film quality production values is extraordinary. Fact 14. Lucas wrote 70 episodes but only made 31. When George Lucas first conceived the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, he wasn't thinking small. He created an extensive, detailed timeline that mapped out Indiana Jones's entire life from early childhood through his young adult years, eventually leading up to the events depicted in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Based on this comprehensive timeline, Lucas assembled story outlines for approximately 70 different episodes, each one carefully plotted to include specific historical figures Indy would meet, significant events he would witness, and moral lessons he would learn along the way. Each outline specified the exact location, time period, and historical personalities that would appear, which were then handed off to screenwriters who would flesh them out into full scripts. The plan was to follow young Indy through multiple seasons, gradually aging him from a curious child into the cynical, world-weary adventurer audiences knew from the films. Lucas even had plans for episodes that would introduce younger versions of characters from Raiders of the Lost Ark, including Indy's mentor and Marion Ravenwood's father, Abner Ravenwood, in an episode set in Jerusalem in June of 1909, and his future rival, René Belloc, in a Honduras adventure set in December of 1920. There were also planned episodes featuring a 5-year-old Indy in Princeton, New Jersey in May of 1905, and numerous other stories that would have filled in gaps in the timeline. Unfortunately, the show's cancellation after 2 seasons meant that only about 31 of these 70 stories were ever actually filmed, leaving nearly 40 episodes worth of Indiana Jones adventures forever trapped in outline form, never to be seen by audiences who might have enjoyed watching Indy's complete journey from childhood to the start of his archaeological career. Fact 15. The show's elderly Indy was completely erased. One of the most distinctive and charming aspects of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles in its original broadcast format was the framing device that introduced each episode. Most episodes began and ended with scenes featuring a 93-year-old Indiana Jones, played with warmth and mischief by actor George Hall, encountering people in present-day New York City circa 1992 and 1993. Old Indy wore an eye patch and he walked with a cane, but remained lively and engaged with the world around him. These bookend scenes would show him being prompted by some random encounter to reminisce about his younger days, at which point the story would transition into the main narrative set in the past. The framing device also revealed significant details about Indy's later life, including the fact that he had a daughter and grandchildren who occasionally appeared in these segments. However, when George Lucas decided to re-edit the series for home video release in 1999, he made the controversial decision to completely remove every single one of these bookend segments with Old Indy. The VHS and later DVD releases, retitled The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, eliminated George Hall's character entirely from the series, replacing the bookends with newly filmed transition sequences featuring the younger characters from the World War I era. This decision had the effect of erasing Old Indy's daughter and grandchildren from existence, creating continuity problems with later films like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which gave Indy a son but never mentioned a daughter. The original bookend episodes have never been officially released on DVD or digital platforms, making them essentially lost media that can only be found through unofficial channels, much to the disappointment of fans who prefer the original broadcast version.